Tel Aviv and Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza agree to a 72-hour ceasefire due to take effect on Tuesday morning. The civilian death toll in the Gaza Strip climbs to 1,865 as the Israelis continue to launch military operations. And the Lebanese army vows to eradicate al-Qaeda-linked militants in the northeastern town of Arsal within 48 hours. Hello there, you're watching Al World News and I'm Fatima Basim. According to reports, both Palestinian resistance groups and Tel Aviv have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire. The Egyptian-sponsored initiative will reportedly come into effect on Tuesday at 8 p.m. local time. This comes as a 7-hour truce in Gaza expired, with occupation forces repeatedly violating the unilaterally imposed ceasefire minutes after it came into effect. Earlier, the Israeli army resumed its strikes on the Gaza Strip after that 7-hour ceasefire expired. For his part, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to continue with the brutal military campaign against the Palestinians.
The campaign in the Gaza Strip goes on. What's about to end is the Israeli military handling of the tunnels. But the operation will end only when a prolonged period of quiet and security is restored to Israel's citizens.
Well, 4 weeks of Israeli attacks on Gaza have left at least 1,865 Palestinians dead and over 10,000 wounded. This as the Zionist war machine shelled more than 4,600 different sites in the besieged Strip. In the latest round of attacks, Israeli warplanes continued to pound different parts of the Gaza Strip, leaving at least 15 people dead and dozens more injured. Several casualties were reported in Israeli shelling on Jabalia in the north, as well as the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. This as occupation forces have shelled the Shati refugee camp west of the Gaza Strip, leaving 1 child dead and nearly 30 others wounded. Let's now speak to political analyst Saib Shah. Mr. Shah, could this 72-hour ceasefire that will take place tomorrow extend into a longer-term deal, considering that the Israelis have so far violated every truce?
It's all that depends on the willing of the United States of America. If the United States of America want to exercise more pressure on the Israeli side, yes, that can be extended. And the other side as well, if the Palestinian resistance would adhere and respect as well the ceasefire. Regarding what they were saying, we only reply to the breakage of the ceasefire of the Israelis. Since the last ceasefire, the Israelis used it to extend their tanks and military presence into the eastern sides of Khan Yunis. And that's when the Palestinian resistance said, we have to reply to that to defend our territories. So if the Israelis respect that, the Palestinians shall respect that. But the only ones, I think, who have the leverage here to extend their pressure on the Israeli sides, the Palestinian resistance, readiness to defend itself and to react, and the Americans' political and military pressure on the Israelis.
Now, Netanyahu said earlier today that operations will continue, but yesterday we did see the beginning of what was called Israeli troop redeployment. How long do you think the Israelis will remain in Gaza?
They are pulling out of the built-up areas and they are deploying near the border. They want to avoid being dragged into a horrifying urban warfare in Gaza Street, which would result in very high casualties for them. The Israelis, they are looking at redeploying of troops, which meant to secure their towns and settlements around the Gaza vicinity, as they say. And they want to have a few ready troops, which ready for future missions to protect these settlements. The occupation troops of pulling of Gaza are redeploying in a new, as their military strategists saying, new formation, as they call it, the breakthrough force, which is made up of large armed vehicles and special operation units and contingents of air forces and highly mechanized kind of forces, not infantry soldiers with it. And they can go deeper into Gaza. That's their plan, to target any launching pad, rocket launching pad, or kind of attacks from the resistance. And that, if it stays and become the status quo, that's going to drag them in kind of an attrition war with the Palestinian resistance, because the Palestinian resistance won't see forces and units like that around Gaza Strip and leave it alone. They will be targeting them, since the Palestinian resistance are trying to liberate their country from occupation forces, and these occupation forces are there to target them as well. So we are seeing kind of a situation which will develop in the future on a longer kind of a conflict.
Yes, now the non-aligned movement today called on Israeli war crimes to be taken to the International Criminal Court. But is that realistic, given that this international court has proven to be nothing more than a political tool for the West?
You are right saying that, but we have to remember NAM represents 120 countries, which is nearly 2/3 of the world countries and 2/3 of the General Assembly Council of the United Nations. And if these people couldn't, as Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, said, they're going to follow the Israelis and take them to the criminal court for the crimes they committed against Gaza. If they didn't then succeed in that, it would show they are hopeless and useless as 120 countries against the status quo of the world order, which run by an imperialist and Zionist entity, and including the 120 will be the new rising powers of BRICS. So if the NAM and BRICS couldn't take Israel for the International Criminal Court, it means the whole world have to act, as we've been calling, to reform this world order and to reform the United Nations and stop being used as a tool for the American foreign policy and Ban Ki-moon as an employee of the American sort of State Department. So they, in this way, they're going to expose the status quo of the international community. And I hope that Gaza will be the leverage of a change onto that field.
All right, political analyst Saeb Shahad, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this.
You're welcome.
Meanwhile, Palestinian resistance groups have retaliated by firing dozens of rockets towards the occupied territories. The Al-Quds brigades fired 2 rockets at the Zakim military base south of Ashkelon. Meanwhile, the Al-Qassam brigades fired another 6 rockets at the Sofa military base east of Khan Yunis. Earlier, Israeli occupation forces said that 7 of its troops were wounded in overnight fighting with resistance groups, while a dozen rockets targeted different parts of the occupied territories, including the Ashkelon and Ashkol regions. Let's cross over now to Bansam Al-Atrash, who is standing by for us in Gaza. Bansam, so a ceasefire has been reportedly agreed between both sides. What more can you tell us about this?
Yes, there has been news that there has been a ceasefire or C-session, 72-hour actually C-session, that they said that the Palestinian factions in Cairo had agreed upon along with the Egyptian side. Also, the Egyptian side has said that it had contacted the Israeli side and they had agreed on this 72-hour ceasefire in order for them to give themselves 3 days to discuss and negotiate the further long-term ceasefire that's going to be or agreement in the past a few days. But so far, none of the Palestinian factions here, neither did Hamas report any confirmation to this news that the media has been reporting so far. But although there has been close sources to the Egyptian delegation, to the Palestinian delegation and the Egyptian side, saying that there has been a confirmation on this 72-hour ceasefire.
Now, there has been talk coming out from Cairo that there is some sort of agreement on lifting the siege. Now, will the resistance agree to any ceasefire, extended ceasefire agreement without the guarantee of this?
Yes, now the Al-Qassam brigades and Saraya al-Quds had announced about it 1 hour ago that the next few hours will carry surprises for the enemy that is on the level of military operations. But then after that, 1 hour after that, came this political statement saying that there has been a C-session agreed to. Now, when we asked some close members to Saraya al-Quds about this controversy in both statements, he said that the military wing was not reported of any ceasefire till now, and the statement was before the announcement of the 72 ceasefire, which means that probably the Palestinian resistance groups are committed to the 72-hour ceasefire if it is announced by the Palestinian party here or Palestinian side inside Gaza.
As you are standing in Gaza at the moment, has there been any firing from the Israelis since that announcement?
Well, so far we can consider this afternoon until these hours to be the calmest actually hours and the hours that carried less pain and attacks since the beginning of this war, and for nearly a month now. So far there has not been any attacks by the Israeli occupation forces or massive attacks. There has been some shelling across areas or shelling in the areas across the borders, and especially in the area of Rafah, but so far no heavy shelling or heavy air raids have been hit by the Israeli warplanes. Although the Palestinians are being cautioned, and as you can see behind me, there has been there is an injury that just arrived to a Shifa hospital. Probably there has been some shelling on the borders, and they managed to get some of the injuries here at the hospital. But other than the 53 Palestinians killed today until until 5 p.m. this afternoon, after that we have not witnessed any sort of fatalities or injuries among Palestinians. Today witnessed 53 Palestinians killed. 32 of them have been dug from under the ruins of their homes and under the rubble of their destroyed homes in Rafah, Jabalia, Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. And the 18 others were killed in separate attacks by the Israeli artillery and Israeli warplanes.
All right, Gaza, Bassam, thank you for giving us the latest in Gaza. Amid global outrage over the Israeli campaign in Gaza, France slammed the slaughter of civilians. The statement by French President François Hollande comes after Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said that the Israelis' right to security did not justify its actions in Gaza and called for a political solution to be imposed by the international community. Meanwhile, delegates from 40 countries have gathered in the Iranian capital Tehran for an emergency meeting of the non-aligned movement. The ministerial summit ended with having adopted a unified stance against the Israeli entity, while vowing to file a lawsuit against Zionist crimes at the International Criminal Court. Our correspondent in Tehran, Hussein Dabash, was there and he found this report.
An international emergency ministerial meeting of the non-aligned movement, or NAM, to discuss the ongoing Israeli aggression on the besieged Gaza Strip has been held in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iranian President Sheikh Hassan Rouhani, who currently heads NAM, was present at the meeting where he gave a speech in which he lashed out at the United Nations Security Council's failure to end the Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people.
The flagrant indifference and inaction of the United Nations Security Council towards the current catastrophe in Palestine, particularly in Gaza, is a clear symbol of injustice in the Security Council. Measures should be adopted by the United Nations Security Council to put an end to such crimes because the Zionist regime is violating human principles.
The Iranian president also called on the group of ministers involved in the emergency meeting on Gaza to find a solution for the oppressed people of Palestine.
Views from all members here present should be exchanged to find a solution for the oppressed and imprisoned Palestinians. The issue of Palestine is the oldest non-resolved issue in the contemporary world. Today, what we're seeing in the gruesome actions of an army of child killers in premeditated attacks killing civilians and showing non-regards to human life, let alone humanity.
The one-day meeting saw foreign ministers from 7 countries representing NAM's Palestinian Committee, including Iran, Qatar, and Palestine.
Set aside any possible differences within us, particularly those of us in this region, or with this or another Palestinian group or faction, and muster all popular and official support for the people, the besieged people of Gaza.
We meet today while the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip continue to endure unspeakable horrors exacted by the occupying power against them. The toll this war of aggression has had is simply unbearable.
Delegates from 40 other countries, including Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, also came together to put more emphasis on the crisis in the Palestinian coastal enclave. This emergency meeting on Gaza was called for by the Iranian Foreign Ministry last month after Israel intensified its ongoing deadly military assault on Gaza. This is the second high-level international emergency meeting over the crisis in the besieged Gaza Strip and the Iranian capital Tehran in less than 2 weeks. Iran is aiming to unite the international community to voice their concern and to put an end to the ongoing Israeli entity's aggression on the Palestinian people in the besieged Gaza Strip. Reporting for AEE TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
Hundreds took to the streets of the capital Sana'a to show solidarity with the Palestinian people and condemn the brutal Israeli aggression against civilians in the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent in Sana'a, Mohammed Al-Attab, has been following that story.
With the brutal Israeli offensive on the people of Gaza entering its 28th day, Yemenis expressed their solidarity. With the brutal Israeli offensive on the people of Gaza entering its 28th day, Yemenis expressed their solidarity with the Palestinians by taking part in a demonstration in the capital Sana'a. The rally, dubbed the 1 Million Man March, was in protest against the Israelis' disproportionate and brutal aerial, ground and sea assault on innocent civilians. Demonstrators began their march from Change Square, the epicenter of the 2011 uprising, carrying Palestinian flags and pictures of resistant figures in a show of solidarity with the Palestinians who they say had been isolated in the face of one of the world's most modern and inhuman killing machines.
We participated in this demonstration to condemn the brutal Israeli killing of Palestinians and to send a strong message that our brothers in Gaza, and to say to them that we are here being buried by the harsh decision of our Asian government.
Protesters called for the downfall of Yemen's coalition government, which they say has not only failed to stand alongside the people of Gaza, but also fell short of working for the best interests of Yemenis when it decided to lift its fuel subsidies, which further worsened the harsh economic situation in the country. Protesters chanted slogans against the world's failure to stop what they described as the Israelis' heinous war crimes on Gaza. This demonstrator said this war has unveiled the Zionist inhuman and callous nature to the world, especially when it continues to target innocent children while being sheltered at the UN-run refugee camps.
Demonstrators have gathered here to send a strong message that the voice of truth will eventually prevail no matter what their government, which they accuse of betraying their revolution's goals, has attempted to do to further keep them more crippled and busier with their deteriorating economic situation. Mohammed Al-Attab, AEE TV, Sana'a.
Well, according to The Intercept's Glenn Greenwald, the most recent Edward Snowden leaks show that the US is assisting the Israelis in engaging in hostilities against its neighbouring countries. This despite Washington's role playing as a bystander in the Middle Eastern crisis, especially when it comes to Gaza.
Innocent civilians in Gaza caught in the crossfire have to weigh on our conscience, and we have to do more to protect them.
Putting on a show of a heartbroken U.S. president sympathizing for the casualties of the Israeli war on Gaza displays Obama's acting skills. Beneath the mask of compassion lies a two-faced representative of the Israeli entity's #1 ally and its provider of millions of dollars worth of weaponry and intelligence since the 1960s. The Intercept's Glenn Greenwald, a former Guardian journalist, has published an analysis of the latest leaked Edward Snowden document of April 12, 2013, which implicates the U.S. in the Middle East crises. American and Israeli intelligence exchange information about certain regions considered strategic for the two allies. The mutually agreed upon geographic targets include the countries of North Africa, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, South Asia, and the Islamic republics of the former Soviet Union. Within that set of countries, cooperation covers the exploitation of internal governmental, military, civil, and diplomatic communications and external security or intelligence organizations. The document goes on to unveil some of the key priorities of this Zio-American cooperation, which include the exploitation of what the document terms the Iranian nuclear development program, followed by Syrian nuclear efforts, the Lebanese Hezbollah's plans and intentions, Palestinian terrorism, and global jihad. Greenwald elaborates that the new Snowden documents illustrate a crucial fact: Israeli aggression would be impossible without the constant, lavish support and protection of the U.S. government, which is anything but a neutral peace-brokering party in these attacks. And the relationship between the NSA and its partners on the one hand and the Israeli spying agency on the other is at the center of that enabling. And it's as simple as filling out a request form. Greenwald exposed that millions in emergency U.S. funds stockpiled in the Middle East are at the Israelis' disposal. Washington's aid to Tel Aviv comes in different forms, including surveillance technology, funding, and weapons, which are used in offensives against occupied Palestine, Lebanon, and most recently, Gaza. Just before the Zionist regime launched an operation against Gaza, the U.S. supplied the Israelis with arms, as it gave them the key to a $1 billion stockpile of ammunition stored there. These facts, which America has fought fanatically to prevent from surfacing, illustrate the double standards of the U.S. administration and further prove that Washington is not a bystander when it comes to the Middle East's conflicts, but an actor with a leading role.
After chairing an emergency cabinet session, Lebanese Prime Minister Tamam Salam vowed full support to the army in the fight against Takfiri extremists in the eastern town of Arsal.
Lebanon is subjected to an aggression against its sovereignty and security perpetrated by Takfiri groups, implementing a suspicious, systematic conspiracy aimed at undermining state capacities and institutions. There will be no political solutions with the Takfiri militants who want to transfer the fighting into Lebanon. We assert that there will be no leniency with the killer terrorists, no conciliation with those who have violated the land and harmed its people.
Meanwhile, a senior Hezbollah official, Sheikh Mohammed Yazbek, declared that the Lebanese resistance group has vowed to support the Lebanese army in its battle against the militants. Sheikh Yazbek said, "We will not leave the army alone, and we will all back the army whose blood is mixed with citizens, confronting the Israeli aggression and in defense of Lebanon and its independence. We will not accept to be occupied, and we will not accept our nation to be occupied." The Lebanese army has reinforced its ranks as it makes further advances against al-Qaeda-linked militants in the eastern town of Arsal. 16 Lebanese soldiers have so far been killed and 40 others injured as fierce clashes rage in the border town.
A war more than 3 years in the making has finally broken out in Lebanon. After 2 days of skirmishes here and an ambush there in the town of Arsal and its hilly surroundings, the Lebanese army has finally decided to engage and eliminate extremist militants from eastern Lebanon. An ambitious 48 hours has been given by the military to complete its mission in Arsal, but the deadline is likely to pose an uphill battle, since the last 48 hours has already resulted in the killing of 16 soldiers and 8 civilians.
What is happening in Arsal is surely a disaster for Lebanon, the nation, and for every Lebanese citizen. We are all for and with the army. The soldiers are our sons. The army is for us, and we are part of the army.
Following a cabinet meeting chaired by the country's premier, a delegation from the Committee of Muslim Scholars headed to the northeastern town as part of an effort to secure the release of kidnapped Lebanese soldiers, aimed at serving as the first step towards ending the violence. However, a temporary ceasefire approved by the Lebanese army, allowing the 2 Sunni sheikhs to begin negotiations, had yet to take effect. The initiative involves a ceasefire, the withdrawal of all gunmen from Lebanese territory, as well as the release of all hostages. In response to the unprovoked attack against an army checkpoint that started this conflict, the armed forces killed over 50 militants as they pushed the extremists back and regained control of hills around the town. This footage released by the Lebanese army purports to show gunmen captured following an assault on one of their camps. From the hillside, the military artillery has shelled positions in the town, which militants from the so-called Islamic State and the Nusra Front have used as hideouts since the war in neighboring Syria broke out in 2011. The Lebanese army will have to conduct grueling counter-insurgency operations to remove militants from the embattled town, but for now the army is trying to contain the al-Qaeda-linked groups. Insulating Arsal from Syrian territory is a priority for the army. This will prevent attacks and weapons smuggling from the Syrian side of the border. And the army can't do that soon enough for the residents in Arsal, with those who fled recalling the terror they endured over the past 2 days.
All the shops in Arsal are closed. Food staples are becoming scarce. The militants have overrun the town. They have set up barricades and are preventing people from coming and going.
I called my parents. They told me that they blocked the road, not allowing anyone to pass, and they were shooting at people.
Now the battle is on, and the army has received widespread public and political support to defend the country against the extremist Takfiri plague that has already destroyed Syria and dissected Iraq.
You're watching Ali Tijah World News, still to come. Erbil and Baghdad look set to increase cooperation in dealing with the threat from militant groups. We'll explain after the break. Welcome back to Ali Tijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Tel Aviv and Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza agree to a 72-hour ceasefire due to take effect on Tuesday morning. The civilian death toll in the Gaza Strip climbs to 1,865 as the Israelis continue to launch military operations. And the Lebanese army vows to eradicate al-Qaeda-linked militants in the northeastern town of Arsal within 48 hours. The Kuwaiti branch of the so-called Islamic State militant group has recently declared the establishment of a province in Kuwait that falls under the authority of the Caliphate. The Kuwaiti governorate is commanded by the former Wahhabi minister Walid al-Tabtabai, who pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the so-called caliph of the false Islamic State. As part of a bid to expand the caliphate across the region, Kuwaiti extremists have expressed willingness to head to the Iraqi city of Basra to fight alongside the group formerly known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria. The president of Iraq's Kurdish autonomous region, Masoud Barzani, has ordered his forces to launch an attack on the so-called Islamic State militants and retake regions which the Kurds recently lost. The Kurdish leader, along with other officials, vowed to launch a counter-offensive after militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State seized more territory administered by the KRG. The recent developments have also led to a rise in support for the Kurds from Baghdad, a move which could potentially reshuffle political and military equations in the country. Kurdish leaders are vowing to launch a counter-offensive after militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State seized more territory into the Kurdish autonomous region of Iraq. But the recent developments have led to the rise of support from Baghdad for the Kurds, which could potentially reshuffle political and military equations in the country.
The Kurdish pursuit for an independent state in Iraq is being seriously undermined, but not by Baghdad. Rather, the threat is coming from the Islamic State militant group, which vowed to seek further expansion into autonomous Kurdish territory after claiming key towns and areas in Nainawa province over the past 48 hours. Despite promises from Kurdish commanders that their forces would launch a counteroffensive, one senior Kurdish official urged the United States to step in and provide weapons. But help is already on the way from an unlikely source. Iraqi Premier Nouri al-Maliki has ordered the Air Force to provide support to the Kurdish Peshmerga forces battling IS militants in the north of the country. Tensions had been rising between Maliki and the Kurds. In July, the Kurdish political bloc withdrew from Iraq's national government in protest over Maliki's accusation that Kurds were harboring terrorists in Arbil. This move by Maliki could mend relations and increase cooperation between the central government and the Kurds. Meanwhile, a more predictable source of support for Kurdish Peshmerga forces is being provided by PYD Kurdish fighters from neighboring Syria, who recently crossed the border. The PYD, or Democratic Union Party, has been fighting Islamic State militants in Syria and has become the dominant force in Syria's Kurdish regions. With this newly added support, transformations are predicted not only for military equations on the ground, but for the country's political dynamics as well.
Let's now speak to political analyst Mudar Al-Khairallah. Now, Mr. Khairallah, just months ago we were hearing of an unspoken truce between the Kurds and IS militants. How did that go sour?
There are a number of reasons for this. The self-proclaimed extremist group, which has labelled itself as an Islamic State, has a history of deception and breaking fulfilled agreements and alliances. We saw this in Syria and recently Mosul when they turned against and broke alliances with the Ba'ath group. The Iraqi Central Army has been successful in stalling their progress towards the south and in particular Baghdad. Indeed, it has regained significant ground that had been captured by the terrorist organisation, as we have recently seen in Diyala province. Now, this has forced the Islamic State to change their strategy and attack lands that has been captured by the Kurdish Peshmerga. The area around Zamar and Sinjar is strategic as it lies next to the Syrian-Turkish border and may give them access to expand their land control further and to boost their financial situation.
Does Maliki's support for the Kurds help in easing current tensions between Erbil and Baghdad?
There's no doubt there's huge potential for this to occur and would certainly receive support from politicians from all sides who are genuinely seeking a unified Iraq. It is certainly a courageous and non-vindictive move from Prime Minister Maliki. The central government in Iraq has suffered major setbacks from Kurdish politicians, and more so since the crisis escalated back in June. I hope Prime Minister Maliki's support will help eliminate tensions and deliver a favourable outcome in the fight against this terrorist organisation.
Does it in any way affect Barzani's calls for independence if there is a failure to even secure Kurdish areas?
I think people from all sides, and including some Kurdish people, have been disappointed in Barzani's response when ISIL made significant gains in Iraq. He had taken advantage of a vulnerable position in Iraq found itself in and expanded his control by capturing and expanding areas previously controlled by central government. He defended his lack of cooperation to join Baghdad in fighting ISIL by giving a sectarian political label to the conflict between Iraq and ISIL. He welcomed Israel's support despite its lack of popularity across the region and the whole world. The latest developments will probably change the desire of the Kurdish people. That is to join, and what's going to happen is I think the Kurdish people will feel that the best way forward would be to join a central government to fight this common enemy and to seek independence through a transparent, peaceful and constitutional process which involves all concerned.
Now, although the Iraqi army is regaining some areas back, IS seems to be advancing in other areas. Should Baghdad change its strategy, or was the real problem the lack of cooperation between Erbil and Baghdad?
There's no doubt that the problem has been a combination of factors, including the lack of support from the Kurdish Autonomous Region and the Peshmerga. I think that Baghdad's strategy has been patient, and we must take into account that time is required for Iraq's military to gain a more powerful military resource from its allies in order to minimize collateral damage in the regions they recapture and also avoid loss of life within its army. This needs a lot more military support from allies and can only be made when we have the capability of executing precision in targeting this terrorist group. We mustn't forget that this group in particular is extremely experienced in street and urban warfare, and therefore we have to seek precision when we fight them.
Now, the Islamic State says that its main objective is to create a caliphate, but could we say that there are foreign interests controlling this group, considering that what they are doing in Syria, Lebanon and Iraq is dividing the people and threatening the very existence of the communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt, and I think most people now realize and appreciate that there are big significant players within the region. These players are turning a blind eye, frankly, to third parties that are funding this terrorist group. And through turning a blind eye and not freezing their assets, they are clearly supporting this group, not only to divide people and divide Iraq and Syria, but it is with the future gain of demolishing a democracy that does exist in Iraq. It also feeds into a lot of other political agenda and complex geopolitics that Israel may be seeking in making sure that the regional powers that might threaten the existence of Israel become weak through partition.
All right, political analyst Mudar Al-Khairallah, thank you for speaking to Ali Tijah. Egyptian troops have killed 11 militants in shootouts in the rest of Sinai Peninsula, where security forces have been battling an insurgency for months. Officials said that the insurgent fighters were killed during an army raid, adding that 3 cars and 8 motorbikes belonging to the terrorist elements were destroyed in the firefight. Libya's new parliament held its first session in the eastern city of Tobruk amid an ongoing split between nationalist and Islamist lawmakers. Meanwhile, political divisions are mirrored on the ground as fighting between rival militias continues to rage across the country.
In a sign of deep division still plaguing a violence-racked Libya, lawmakers gathered in the eastern city of Tobruk to inaugurate the country's newly elected parliament in a first formal session that was boycotted by Islamist lawmakers. Elected in June, the House of Representatives replaces the General National Congress, or the GNC, where Islamist factions had more influence than in the new one.
The transitional government is proposing an urgent vision, at the core of which is to put in place all necessary solutions to preserve security, using all means possible that will produce a balanced situation in Libya. The government, which is working day and night to take control of the situation amid the widespread of arms and weapons of war, hopes to take a united national stance through a national unity government that is inclusive of everyone and will protect people.
The lawmakers gathered in a heavily guarded hotel in the eastern city after 3 weeks of fighting has made the capital Tripoli and the country's second city of Benghazi unsafe for the parliamentary session. But a sign of division over the legitimacy of the new assembly was soon revealed, as 1,500 kilometers away in the capital Tripoli, President of the outgoing GNC, Nouri Abu Sahmain, called for a rival parliamentary session to make an official handover of power. On the ground, heavy artillery and rocket fire restarted early Monday across Tripoli, where the Misrata brigades are fighting to oust rivals and Tani militias from the international airport they have controlled since 2011. As explosions lit up the Tripoli skyline, scores of foreign nationals, mostly British, boarded a British survey ship bound for Malta.
As you can see, very pleased to confirm the safe arrival here in Malta of HMS Enterprise with 110 passengers aboard, predominantly British nationals. As you can also see, they've had a long voyage. They've left traumatic circumstances in Libya, so our top priority now is to give them the care and the support on their arrival here to ensure that they are treated with the utmost care, that the vulnerable amongst them receive what they need from us, and for us to help them as they take forward their onward transport to the UK.
The past 2 weeks of fighting between rival militias in Libya have been the worst since the civil war that ousted Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, prompting Western governments to follow the US in pulling their diplomats out of the North African country. Some are still hoping that the newly formed assembly might help nudge the warring factions towards a ceasefire. But as the political bickering continues, so too does Libya's descent towards a failed state.
Turkey will hold its first popular presidential vote this weekend, with 3 hopefuls contending the nation's executive seat, including Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But according to many observers, the Turkish premier has already crossed the finish line.
The crowd went wild when Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan scored a hat-trick during a celebrity football match in an Istanbul stadium last month. But what seemed like an orchestrated match may not be the only easy game the Turkish premier will be playing in, as millions will head to the polls this Sunday to vote for Turkey's first elected president. Many will be placing their cards on Erdogan to beat his 2 rivals. While the 11-year-long premier still has to weather the storm from the grueling opposition, his opponents are convinced it has been an unfair contest. Without doubt, his grandiose infrastructure projects, from Istanbul's 3rd airport to the launching of a high-speed train, won't satisfy everyone. Most recently, the 60-year-old politician has upped the ante on the Israelis by condemning their atrocious acts on Gaza. Even if he were to adopt the Palestinian cause as a domestic policy instrument, Turkey's leadership still finds itself lonely in the region, with severe ties among officials in Cairo, Baghdad, and Syria. Desperate and paranoid, Erdogan is attempting to pick up from last May's Gezi demonstrations and December's corruption scandal that implicated key government officials and their family members. Now, the Turkish premier's main challenge will be taking a conciliatory tone towards secular Turks and avoiding measures that will further polarize the country.
At least 400 Ukrainian soldiers have crossed the country's eastern border, seeking refuge in Russia. This as artillery shelling by Kiev's troops on eastern Ukraine continued unabated, causing massive damage to the infrastructure of the region and claiming the lives of at least 10 civilians.
More than 400 Ukrainian troops have been allowed to cross into Russia after requesting sanctuary. It is the largest but not the first case of desertion into Russia by Ukrainian soldiers involved in Kiev's military crackdown in the east of the country. According to the Rostov region's border guard, a total of 438 soldiers, including 164 Ukrainian border guards, were granted permission to enter Russia on Sunday night. The flow of deserters from the ranks of the Ukrainian Army and National Guard seems to be increasing amid the escalating violence in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, where Kiev is fighting against armed anti-government separatists. The Russian border checkpoint at the Gukovo crossing was shelled from the Ukrainian side twice on Sunday. OSCE observers and journalists were working at the checkpoint when it was attacked. Meanwhile, the deputy mayor in the encircled insurgent stronghold of Donetsk told AFP that shooting in a residential suburb had killed 6 civilians and injured 13, the latest victims of more than 3 months of a brutal military offensive launched by Kiev that has so far claimed at least 1,150 lives. But Kiev remains undeterred. Security official in the Ukrainian capital announced that their forces recaptured an important railway hub from rebels. Government forces have made moderate gains over the past month and say they are edging close to cutting off fighters in Donetsk from their comrades in Luhansk. Kiev has promised to stamp out the insurgency in the near future, but analysts warn the fighting could drag on as rebels have holed up in major cities and pledged to battle to the end.
Here's a reminder of our top stories. Tel Aviv and Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire due to take effect on Tuesday morning. The civilian death toll in the Gaza Strip climbs to 1,865 as the Israelis continue to launch military operations. And the Lebanese army vows to eradicate al-Qaeda-linked militants in the northeastern town of Arsal within 48 hours. Well, that's all from me and the Al Jiyah News team. Thank you for watching and good night.